Welcome to OCTO TALK from Computacenter, where we discuss the latest innovations, trends and customer conversations. Today we're covering the topic of adoption and change management, or ACM. I'm joined by my colleague Max Carton, who's a practice lead in our Group Professional Services organisation. So welcome, Max. Thank you for joining me today. So the first question then, ACM, adoption and change management, what is it and why is it important for our customers?
Good question, Ash. So I think in my view it's very, very important. It's in fact essential for any business outcome that our customers are seeking these days. I do also think it's interesting that the industry has struggled for many years with understanding actually what ACM is, what the moniker is, and I think Microsoft and others have all settled on the fact that we should refer to anything in regards to our end users from our customers, is adoption and change management. And ACM, in my view, absolutely essential. I think we see a lot of customers putting together business cases, right? Very large business cases that they tend to want to achieve. However, 9 times out of 10, they'll fail to achieve any of the intended value outcomes of said business cases without successful adoption and change management. And when I talk about adoption and change management, I talk about the sort of the change management side of things, so looking at understanding the impact of the change, how it's going to affect your users, what the current state is, the to-be state that you need to get to, and the interim steps that you need to support your people on that journey. I think it's very important that we make the point that it is a journey, and people need to be brought along that change journey as they go along. And importantly as well, we talk about adoption, so that's sort of tacked into the wider piece of how we truly realise the business outcomes that our customers are seeking. And most importantly, it's about creating that really sustainable behaviour change that changes people's ways of working. So it almost becomes a new step, a new way of doing something. That tick then sets up, and then every day that becomes an addictive thing that actually fundamentally then changes your way of working. And I think a lot of companies talk about it, but very little actually achieve it. And it's almost, for me, changing the conversation, right? Changing the focus away from sort of pro-sci, which very important, has its definite need and requirement in terms of looking at the strategic change management piece, but actually really changing that focus and that lens onto end users. Doing workshops with them, understanding what their pain points are, what their challenges are, so that we can truly help them on that journey.
Excellent. So very comprehensive answer. Thank you. In my experience, ACM has not had the focus and attention that it should have done. Do you want to speak a bit about what you've seen in the past, and maybe a bit of why it's important, especially now when we look at kind of the current technology and skills gap, that ACM is taken more seriously?
Sure, really good question actually, Ash, and one that I have seen quite a bit in the marketplace. I think adoption and change management tends to be considered an afterthought, and it's something that's sort of tacked on at the end, and actually from a cost perspective it tends to be the first thing to be removed in any bid. And actually I think the industry and our customers are slowly starting to wake up to the fact that it needs to be positioned from the off. If we can like your team does, and some of our teams, when we have customer strategy workshops, if we truly understand the kind of the wider strategy in terms of what the CIO, the CEO is looking to achieve, and then we can then layer that in to understanding how the end users, some of their pain points, some of their challenges, we can really create a compelling proposition, which also then focuses the right buying activities for the right solutions and the right software, not just this point solution problem that we see where actually let's go and get it lowest cost compliance. And we tend to see some challenge there actually when it comes to people using it, and they don't feel that they've been brought along that change journey, right? As we come back to the beginning, I think it's also, I've seen a lot of customers struggle when it comes to understanding, I guess, ACM. It's a bit of can be a bit of a confusing topic, and hopefully that explanation at the start changes starts to change a bit of that perception. But I do think it is always tacked on as a bit of an afterthought or thought of just some communications effectively. And we both know that isn't the case. We also know that there is a huge digital skills gap in this country and in fact around the world at the moment. And I think Lloyds Bank did some research back in 2020 that something like 50% of the UK digital workforce lacks basic and intermediate digital skills. If you try and roll out anything right on top of that in that environment, you're going to have challenge from the off really. So I think it's important that we start with understanding what is the skill base, right? What do our customers what do they need? What are they proficient in? What are their users telling us? Actually almost start on getting everyone to a level that they're all comfortable with, and then we can look to do really exciting things with other new and emerging technology.
Excellent. So it's a great point, Max. One of the things that I've definitely seen is because of the speed of change in technology, like we're seeing this massive ramp of the capabilities of technology that our customers are now deploying or just turning on in some instances within our customers. And as you said, the skills gap, we're seeing it getting wider. So because of the software as a service nature, we're seeing more features being released. Many times customers either don't understand, they don't know, they don't care, it could even be, but what these features are coming out as, but also how it can actually help their organisation. So I see ACM playing a massive part, and it kind of comes back to this continual process, right? And I'm sure we'll talk more about this, but because of the speed of change, we've got to make sure that we ensure that our customers and their users understand how they get the best out of those technologies. So given the fact that many of our customers are deploying lots of modern technologies that have got lots of kind of capabilities, can you share any examples or anecdotes of where you've seen customers, even though they deploy things like AI, Copilot, etc., into their environment, still not getting the experience or effect that they would expect from deploying them?
Certainly can, Ash, and again, fantastic question. I like how you described it there. It's almost, as I tend to term it, the provide and pray approach that we see some customers doing, and we're absolutely there to try and help customers to do it in a different way, I think. Some interesting things, even I think a few months ago, I saw very recently quite a large company, sort of household name in the UK here, and they were looking to deploy Copilot. I think they had a pilot that they were looking at implementing. It was about 300 users or so. But the challenge that they had, I'll be honest and candid, it failed. But the challenge that they had fundamentally was that, again, it comes back to the lack of digital skills, right? The lack of understanding how SharePoint works, how OneDrive works. Microsoft Graph couldn't see any of the wonderful data that these guys have been creating. In fact, they weren't actually on some of these other 365 applications. So I think, as with any Copilot project that we would do at Computacenter, we would also look at the governance setup and look at how is that data structured, because actually the biggest problem hiding in plain sight, in my view, is the fact that users they're scared of AI. It's this big buzzword in this in the world at the moment. It's going to take over people's jobs, and actually, in my view, it's completely the opposite. First, we need to be confident digitally. We need to be confident in the amazing technology that our workplaces, including Computacenter and others, offer us around leveraging SharePoint, leveraging OneDrive. How many times do you do you receive an email, perhaps, because I know you don't send, but do you receive an email with an attachment? And I think that lack of digital maturity, when you extrapolate that out across the company, this becomes a critical success factor, in my view, adoption and change management. Absolutely. But not just that, in terms of profitability, and I think more importantly, we're here today in an August day, a rather warm day. I hear there's a bit of a challenge with water and a drought, and actually if people didn't have 20 copies of the same file existing coexisting in the space, and just had that single version that they shared, they knew how to use OneDrive correctly, they knew how to use permission and versioning, we would be onto a digital future that then, when you look to deploy things like Copilot, you immediately see some of the success and the benefits that brings.
Absolutely. I think you've hit on a key point there. See, lots of the challenges that I see are not technology, it's how you use the technology, how it applies. And many times that we speak to customers, or even users within customers, they don't understand why that tool is necessary for them. I've done things a certain way, I'll continue to do things a certain way, and unless we can show them the value of doing something differently and how it benefits them, and to your point, how the technology actually helps augment what they do, not replace what they do, these are all the kind of challenges that we're seeing with customers, in terms of making sure that any of the tools that they invest in, tools that they use, actually become productive, and they start to see some return on investment. Because to your point, if those tools are deployed and they're not being used, then there's no return on investment, right? So then there's less of a desire for the business to invest in new technologies as they come down the road. So a really interesting point, and I think it may be too early for us to look at return on investment for some of these tools, but certainly the best way I see that customers can do this is by being really clear about what people do, how they do it, and how those tools can actually save them time, make them more productive, reduce the impact of data sprawl within organisations, etc. So if we then, and this is a topic that always comes up, we've talked about Copilot, but AI more generally, or automation, these kind of tools that help us to change processes and digitise, what kind of role do you see those having in the future of ACM and the way that we work?
Great question, Ash, and definitely one that I've been thinking about a lot recently. I think to some extent, ACM and generative AI, Gen AI go hand in hand, right? When you think about the adoption side of ACM. And I'll give you a couple of examples, but when we look at designing an adoption project, adoption change management project, we look at making sure that we are addressing all of the different learning styles that people have through a mix of different media types. But what we can't do, to some extent, is almost be over your shoulder, looking at how you're working and understanding, actually, do you know what, Ash, you're doing really well on the OneDrive side, but actually SharePoint, we might need to look at permissioning. And I can see huge power and potential with AI helping me out and helping you out and helping everyone out with that adoption curve, because a lot of it is fear, a lot of it is uncertainty, a lot of it is I've not done that before, I've not pressed that button, I don't want to click it, I don't want to see what it does. But if we had AI in the background coaching us, understanding how we're behaving, understanding actually where it thinks that we could get some bigger personal return on investment, right, from the technology, that to me is mind-blowing, and I think the future of ACM in my view.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're seeing more of that personalisation because of the understanding. Essentially, most of what we do, I think from a personal perspective, our information and data is used by many different organisations to give us a bespoke or personalised service. I see more of that happening within organisations. Clearly there's some security challenges and maybe HR challenges to discuss around those, but AI being able to help me to do my job better is kind of where I see, and I think AI almost becoming your personalised ACM tutor, or guide along that journey is going to be quite key. So taking that into account, if we think about the different, I suppose, business units within organisations, how can we help tailor strategies for different parts of the business? Because there may be some that don't even need AI as an example. So have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, again, really good one. And I think where I've seen projects that tend to not go so well is where it's a one-size-fits-all approach. When we look at Gen AI as these are the use cases, these are the user stories, and we're going to try these across all departments. I think that's a recipe in my view for disaster. But I do think there's a lot you can do by almost changing it around and starting line of business first. Really focusing, making sure you have cross-representation across that business line. Understand how they work, because a lot of business units tend to work very differently. They have different outcomes that they're looking for, different value propositions, right, in terms of what would attract them to a new tool, and really get them to try something new, which is the key. If we can get them to try something new, we're onto something. So I think if it were in my view, I would start business unit, start with the user stories, understand the pain points as well, where people like to work, understand the existing business process, and then almost layer in AI to see where it can help. I mean, we've seen a lot of really successful use cases with legal. I can talk in from a group professional services standpoint. Here internally in UK projects, we've seen huge success with using Gen AI in the right way, you know, in a supported and GIS supported, you know, privacy supported way. But we've seen huge return on investment. You know, some of the things that AI has helped us to do in terms of getting things out the door quicker in terms of proposals to customers. I mean, that really has been a huge win for GPS and for AI. So I think by approaching it almost with, you know, you need your champions, but approaching it business unit by business unit, that is the only way that you're going to see the returns on investment for Gen AI.
Excellent, thank you for that. So given, you know, we've talked about how important ACM is for organisations, especially as we said, given the technology change, speed of change, number of generations within organisations. So, you know, to your point that you mentioned earlier, ensuring that we service them or help them in the correct way. What should organisations do in terms of their, when I say capability, or a team or individuals, how should that be structured within an organisation? Because generally, as I've seen in the past, maybe one or two people might do that within an organisation. They may turn to a third party to help them. But what should they start to do given, you know, the importance of kind of ACM moving forward? So
great question, Ash. I think it's very interesting that we're talking about it right now. I think the conversation I had maybe 10, 12 years ago was, you know, with CIOs around what are you going to do if, for example, it snows tomorrow, right? What are you going to do? What's your UC&C solution? You know, what's your video conferencing solution? And at the time, I remember it being a real struggle, a real battle to persuade companies to invest in these types of technologies that would allow people to work wherever they are in the world, right? And notwithstanding some changes that I think we're seeing in some parts of the industry, you know, some industries at the moment, I still think it's very poignant to say that, you know, 10 years ago, that's where we were at. Obviously, COVID was the great enabler. It was the thing that sort of almost overnight enabled that to happen. And now you've got lots of people working all over the place, where they're not in the office. Perhaps sometimes they can't go and say, "Oh, Ash, can you just show me on your screen? How, you know, how do I do this?" So that is why it's so critical now that companies, for their own success and success of their customers, it doesn't just become a role with one person or two people in the whole organisation, right, that do all of this. Because A, they're too busy, and that's what we see with customers when we you know, they're very aware of the need for ACM, but they only have one or two people, and that's really where we come in to help, I guess, augment and either do it with them, you know, do it for them, or they, you know, do it with us, as the case may be. So I think it's a really critical point to say that in this world of ever-changing pace of change, new features, you know, I think only a few years ago there was 900 user impacting massive feature releases in the 365 roadmap in a single year. I mean, just trying to work out those numbers, that's quite frankly, has exactly right. It has my head going. So how do we best support people in that environment? Well, we need a permanent ACM function that has the right access to the right people. So amazing content generation, videographers, amazing communications experts, because that's really where we see some of the most impactful comms being created. Really good and experienced change managers, and then adoption consultants. And that team of people, I think, will get a lot of our customers and ourselves indeed to where we need to be in the future.
Excellent, thank you for that. So it kind of brings us to our last question. What do you see as the future of ACM then? We've talked about a few things, you know, AI helping, etc. But if you were to, you know, look at, you've talked about the last 10 years, you know, as to where we are now, what do you see as being the future of ACM? And just maybe to tag on to that, how will that affect our customers, but also maybe, you know, people like ourselves that help our customers with ACM?
Great question. And if I had, you know, what is it? There's maybe the $1 million question as well, Ash. But let me try and answer it in a way that I think it should be answered. And that is, I think we have discussed that very much the future of ACM is with Gen AI support. I think that's critical. That, you know, Gen AI will understand what you're doing. It can suggest things. I also think the future of ACM it's you know, about micro learning and changing micro behaviours, because that's where we actually see things adopted. We're so busy. We talked about 900 features hitting you. Now I think I had 3 meetings before I even left the office this morning to come here. With all of that going on, we are very, very busy individuals. And I think we don't have time to dedicate reading 4-page PDF, watching a 5-minute video anymore. I very much see the future going in a micro-learning, micro-behaviour changing way. So we have small snippets coming in. Hey, let's use a bit of nudge theory, right? Let's get people behind the curve and actually get them to think differently, because 9 times out of 10, that's actually the issue, is to get people to think differently and to start thinking about potentially what their life might be if they were doing things differently and using new technology to its full potential, shall we say. So I think that's an interesting one. Who knows what will happen, right, with technology? Who knows what will happen with some of the other elements of behavioural change? I think that that to me sort of bringing psychology into it more, really, really fascinating topic. But I won't give all the secrets away just now.
No. So I'm going to throw something left field. So one of the things that I've had conversations with customers about, is, and we use the term kind of digital human. So if we think about things like analytics, which we've not really talked too much about, but analytics to understand what's going on in environments, to help automate, and orchestrate some of the processes and things that we need to do on a day-to-day basis. I can see a time where we get to a point where, given let's say my work persona, my computer, the technology that I use, the services understand enough about me such that certain things that I do, it will be able to do for me. I'll give you an example. So if it knows that we have a monthly catch-up, so you send me an invite saying, look, Ash, I can't do this time, I need to move it. My digital version knows that, we work together a lot, it's important that we keep this meeting, so it will reschedule it without any of my knowledge, because it knows that I would do that. There's clearly going to be some more important things where it might make a suggestion that I then choose to do rather than actually do it for me, right? So I can see a spectrum of things coming along where AI is actually helping me, as an assistant would be. And that may also include, to your point, Ash, you do these things, but if you did these in this way, you'd be more effective. You could save yourself 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Do you ever see then a point where you've got me as a real human and my digital equivalent within my machine, that ACM will be needed for those digital versions as well?
Wow, yeah, fascinating, and I can see that actually it's probably around the corner, that type of experience that we'll all be having soon, right? In terms of the digital Ash and the digital Max of the future. I think absolutely, right? People, just saying it out loud, right? Possibly, does it fill you with a bit of fear? And I think
interesting.
From an ACM perspective, you need to be brought along. We all need to be brought along that journey, right? We need to understand, what's it going to do? What does it mean for us? What do we need to provide to the tool to get the most out of it, right? And the engine. I think the behaviours thing that you've picked up on there, that's fascinating for me, because that to some extent, does ACM, is it still as important once the digital Ash of the future is behaving in the way, and actually maybe using technology in the way that you would? Does ACM have less importance, or do we then look at some of the other things in terms of how do we work and play most effectively, right? How do we be our most productive selves? I have this conversation with a lot of my colleagues, project managers, etc., around the fact that we're not scared of the Gen AI of the future anymore. We are prompt engineers, and that's what we need to be focusing on, right? How do we get the best out of the tool? How can we make our lives easier so that we can focus more on some of the strategy, on some of these, like conversations like these, right? Really eye-opening conversations. So
yeah, we could go on forever on this one. Does Gen AI become a digital, psychotherapist, or it's actually helping us to improve from a personal development perspective, as well as, so that's working on our kind of, emotions, thoughts, motivations, as well as the technical side. Who knows, right? But it's all these things I think are really interesting, and things that we need to think about in terms of how it might shape what we do now, right? Because if we are helping our individuals in our organisations to understand the technology better and the reasons for doing or using that technology and how it helps shape and drive a more effective Ash or Max as an example. You know, that's almost seeding, you know, the road, you know, to lead to those kind of things that we talked about. I mean, you know, maybe you know, in a year's time we'll be sitting down and having a discussion around, you know, digital ACM, you know, ACM 20, whatever it might be. But you can see, you know, as you said, that the future is quite exciting, I think.
It is, it's super exciting. And I don't think, you know, I think we talk about the future, but we also need to focus on the current state, right? Which is where a lot of organisations are.
Yeah.
And actually closing that digital skills gap. I mean, I can imagine a world in a few years' time, hopefully, where that digital skills gap doesn't exist anymore, and then we can really start motoring in terms of, you know, productive. I see a lot of benefit, societal benefit, environmental benefit for our kids, for our children, right, in terms of how they grow up learning about the world. And as we know, you know, the climate's a really important one that we need to focus on.
Well, thank you for joining us today.
It's been a pleasure.
Fascinating discussion.
Thank you for having me, Ash.
So thank you for joining us today on OCTO Talk from Computacenter. We hope you enjoyed this episode. You can subscribe on the usual channels and look forward to the next episodes coming very soon. Until next time, stay curious and keep innovating.